Good morning. I wanted to talk today a little bit more about the treatment process for tics or Tourette syndrome. First, quickly note, yes, I do have tape on my head. Now, when we're trying to address tics, we're wanting, as we talked about in the previous video, to first build awareness of the tics. That means that we can practice. We say like, all right, I'm going to make a list of all the tics that I currently experience, understanding that sometimes tics vary a bit, right? So there are some tics that may present slightly different form from time to time, but tics mostly stay pretty steady. So I'll make a list of the tics that I have, and then I'm going to pick one. I don't really want to try to focus on one tic at a time, because if I try to do them all, it is overwhelming, it's too much, and I will undoubtedly become discouraged eventually. So, how do I pick which tic I'm going to focus on? Well, I want to pick a tic that, and this is much easier for somebody who has a lot of practice in treating tics to identify, but I want to pick a tic that I think will probably respond pretty quickly to treatment. So that way I can feel some encouragement. I can get some benefit or some payoff for all the effort that I'm going to put forth in trying to address the tic. So picking the tic that's the hardest tic may not be a good idea. I might just get really frustrated and discouraged if I did that. Now, the next thing is I want to pick a tic that ideally kind of matters to me so that the payoff is meaningful. So if I picked a tic that's very minor, that I barely even notice and doesn't really matter at all to me, then maybe I make some progress and that'd be great, but it may not really feel like it matters very much. And so I don't get as big of a payoff as I do if I pick a tic that matters. So we're looking for kind of a balance. So just to sort of recap that, I want to pick a tic that matters enough that when I show some improvement with it, I feel good about that. And I also want to pick one that I'm likely to have improvement with fairly quickly. So what are some of the things that I would use when working with people on their tics to find which tic to pick? Tics that happen more frequently, in my experience, tend to respond a little more quickly to treatment because there are more opportunities for practice. So each time a tic happens, that gives me a chance to practice using my competing response or exercise for the tic. And that means my brain gets a little bit better at doing that. If it's a tic that happens like once a day, then that's not a lot of opportunity for practice. And it's probably going to take a while for it to really begin to take effect. So picking tics that happen fairly often is a good idea. Now, if I pick a tic that happens really frequently, like constantly, it might still be a good target, but it may be harder to get that one to show improvement just because the brain is already so primed to do it so much. So if you can, look for some sort of a magical middle ground and finding a tic that happens pretty often, so you get good opportunities for practice, and so that it will then matter and you get some motivation and some pretty good payoff for it. Now, one other thing I would like to note about tics in terms of selecting which ones to target first, some of the muscle groups that are used in tics are harder to identify and harder to, well, in the manner of speaking, to block. So tics with the eyes tend to be harder because these muscles are very small and it is pretty hard to block them from happening. That is, you can't really easily do something that will interfere with it, that muscle movement. It's not impossible. And we do have techniques that we use to target eye tics specifically, but it tends to be a little more difficult, and it may not be the easiest or most ideal first target when you're trying to address your tics. Then I'll talk about some of the different techniques we use for eye tics later on as well. I'll probably try to devote one of these videos specifically just to eye tics because they tend to be a little bit tricky. Let's see. Generally speaking, I'd say tics that involve large muscle groups, they tend to respond pretty well because we can do things to interfere with them. It's a little bit easier to do. And tics with small muscle groups tend to be a little bit harder. That also includes vocal tics. It's not so easy to see the muscle movements involved in vocal tics, which makes them a little bit harder to target. Again, not impossible, and there are techniques that we use for those, but they may not be ideal for your first target if you have options. So think in terms of larger muscle groups and larger ranges of motion, and those make for pretty good early targets. All right, so I'm going to wrap that up here, and we'll get into these a little bit more in the next video as well. Thank you.